What if the greatest challenge of Mars isn't getting there, but never coming home? Not because the rockets fail, not because the technology isn't ready, but because home, as you once knew it, no longer exists. Not in the way you remember, not in the way you left it. Tonight, we are not going to celebrate the rockets. We are not going to cheer for the flags. We are not going to rehearse the heroic narratives of exploration that have been told 1,000 times before. Instead, we are going somewhere quieter, somewhere more honest. We are going to drift through the questions nobody asks. The isolation, the silence, the slow unraveling of everything familiar. The biology that betrays us. The distance that separates us from everyone we love. The earth we leave behind. And the version of ourselves we might become, on a world that was never meant for us. This is not a story about conquering Mars. This is a story about understanding what we are willing to sacrifice. So, find a comfortable place. Breathe deeply. Let the noise of the day fall away. Let your thoughts settle like dust after a storm. Because tonight, we drift. We drift through the red desert, through the cold vacuum, through the quiet questions that have no easy answers. We drift through the opposite direction. Welcome to Calm Cosmic Drift. Relax. Let your mind wander. Let the cosmos carry you. And let us begin. Part 1. The distance between dreams. There is a quiet assumption we carry with us, often without realizing it. It lives somewhere in the background of our modern imagination. A whisper that grows louder with every rocket launch, every headline about habitat prototypes, every ambitious announcement from billionaires and space agencies alike. The assumption is this, that Mars is our future, that we will go there, that we will build there, that we will become, somehow, a two-planet species. And perhaps we will. But before we allow ourselves to drift too far into that future, we owe it to ourselves to consider something else, something quieter, something the headlines rarely mention. We need to consider what we leave behind, not just physically, not just the atmosphere and the gravity and the familiar blue sky that has sheltered every human being who has ever lived. We need to consider what we leave behind inside ourselves. Because Mars is not just a destination, it is a mirror. And when we look at it, we are really looking at a question we have not yet learned to ask properly. The question is not, can we go? The question is, what does it mean to go? Let's begin with the distance. Not the number, though we will get to the number, but the experience of distance itself. Think about the farthest you have ever been from home. Maybe it was a different country. Maybe it was a different continent. Maybe it was simply a different state, a different city, a place where the sky looked unfamiliar, and the air smelled different, and the sounds of birds or traffic or silence felt subtly wrong. Now multiply that feeling by something almost impossible to hold in your mind. Multiply it by the entire Earth. Because when you stand on the surface of Mars, Earth is not just far away. Earth is a speck, a pale blue dot, as Carl Sagan once reminded us, suspended in a sunbeam. But it is not just the distance that changes things. It is the delay. Light takes time to travel. We know this intellectually. We know it from textbooks and documentaries and the quiet certainty of physics. But we rarely feel it. On Earth, communication is instantaneous. We speak and someone hears us. We ask a question and an answer arrives almost before we have finished asking it. This is not the case on Mars. Depending on where the two planets are in their orbits, because both are moving, both are drifting through the solar system in their own endless dance, the signal from Mars to Earth takes anywhere from 4 to 24 minutes, one way. So if you are standing on Mars, looking up at that pale blue dot, and you ask a question, you wait. You wait 4 minutes. You wait 24 minutes. You wait long enough to make a cup of tea, to read a chapter of a book, to watch a storm roll across the distant horizon of that alien world. And then, eventually, an answer arrives. But it is not an answer to the question you just asked. It is an answer to the question you asked nearly half an hour ago. That delay changes everything. It changes the way you think. It changes the way you speak. It changes the way you relate to the people you left behind. Because the people you left behind are not waiting for you. They are living their lives. They are having breakfast. They are arguing about politics. They are falling in love. They are getting old. And you are frozen in time, watching from a distance so vast that the very concept of distance begins to lose its meaning. This is the first thing we forget when we talk about colonizing Mars. We forget the silence. We forget the loneliness. We forget that human beings are social creatures, wired for connection, calibrated for the subtle rhythms of face-to-face interaction. And Mars offers none of that. Mars offers dust. Mars offers cold. Mars offers a sky that is not blue, but butterscotch, tinted by the fine particles of iron oxide that hang perpetually in its thin atmosphere. Mars offers radiation, constant, unrelenting, invisible, bombarding the surface with particles that tear through DNA and accumulate silently in the cells of any living thing that stays too long. Mars offers gravity that is only 38% of Earth's gravity, and that might sound like a curiosity, a fun fact to mention at a dinner party. But it is not a fun fact. It is a fundamental assault on the human body. Because your body was not designed for Mars. Your body was designed for Earth. Your bones, your muscles, your heart, your inner ear, your vestibular system, every part of you evolved over millions of years to function in a specific gravitational field. On Mars, that field is weaker, and your body does not know how to handle it. Within months, your bones begin to lose density. Your muscles begin to atrophy. Your heart, which has spent its entire life pumping blood against the pull of Earth's gravity, begins to work less efficiently. This is not speculation. There is evidence. This is what happens to astronauts on the International Space Station, where gravity is effectively zero. And those astronauts stay for 6 months, maybe a year. On Mars, you would stay for the rest of your life, because there is no return ticket. Let us be honest about that. The missions we imagine, the grand, heroic voyages to the Red Planet, are not round trips. They are one-way journeys. Every plan, every proposal, every serious assessment from NASA and SpaceX and every other agency assumes that the first colonists will not come back. They will live on Mars, and they will die on Mars. This is physics. The fuel required to lift off from Mars, to escape its gravity, to travel back to Earth, it is simply too heavy, too expensive, too complex. And even if it were possible, the human body would not survive the return, not after years of exposure to radiation, reduced gravity, and the psychological toll of living in a confined habitat on a dead world. So the first Martians will be pioneers in the truest sense. They will leave Earth knowing they will never see it again. They will leave knowing they will never feel rain on their skin, never smell the grass after a storm, never hear the sound of birdsong in the morning, never taste fresh food grown in soil that has been alive for billions of years. They will trade all of this for something else, for the chance to be the first, for the chance to stand on another world and look up at a sky filled with unfamiliar stars, for the chance to say, "We did it." But is that enough? Is that enough to sustain a human life? Is that enough to justify the cost? Not just the financial cost, which is astronomical, but the human cost. The cost of a life spent underground, in habitats shielded from radiation, never feeling the sun on your face without a helmet between you and the sky. The cost of a life spent breathing recycled air, drinking recycled water, eating food grown in artificial light. The cost of a life spent knowing that if something goes wrong, if the air recycler fails, if the water purifier breaks, if a dust storm blankets the solar panels, there is no rescue. There is no backup. There is only you and the red dust and the silence. And this is where we must pause. This is where we must allow ourselves to sit with these thoughts. Because the dream of Mars is seductive. It is heroic. It is everything we want to believe about ourselves as a species. But the reality of Mars is something else entirely. The reality is hard. The reality is lonely. The reality is a long, slow, deliberate separation from everything that has ever made life worth living. And that is not an argument against going. It is simply an invitation to think carefully about what we are really choosing. Let us stay with this idea for a moment. The idea of separation, because it is not just physical, it is temporal, it is psychological, it is existential. When we go to Mars, we are not just traveling across space, we are traveling across time. Not in the science fiction sense, no time dilation, no relativistic effects that would allow us to return to a future Earth. No, we are traveling across time in a quieter, more profound way. We are leaving behind the timeline of Earth. We are stepping into a different rhythm. A rhythm measured not by days and nights, because a day on Mars is only 40 minutes longer than a day on Earth. A curious coincidence that almost seems like a wink from the universe. But by seasons that last twice as long. By years that stretch to 687 Earth days, by a calendar that bears no resemblance to anything we have ever known. And in that different rhythm, we become different people. Not because we choose to, but because we have to. Because survival on Mars demands a level of self-sufficiency that no human community has ever achieved. There is no supply chain. There is no delivery truck. There is no grocery store around the corner. There is only what you brought with you and what you can make from the resources around you. And those resources are few. Mars has water, frozen in its polar caps and buried beneath its surface. Mars has carbon dioxide, which can be converted into oxygen. Mars has minerals and metals that could, in theory, be mined and refined. But none of this is easy. None of this is guaranteed. And none of this happens quickly. The first colonists will spend their days not exploring, not discovering, not fulfilling some romantic vision of interplanetary adventure. They will spend their days maintaining, repairing, scavenging, surviving. They will be janitors and plumbers and electricians and farmers. They will spend hours cleaning dust off solar panels. They will spend hours fixing seals on airlocks. They will spend hours monitoring the life support systems that are, quite literally, keeping them alive. And at the end of those long, exhausting days, they will look up at the sky through a window, through a helmet, and see a tiny blue dot. And they will wonder. They will wonder if it was worth it. They will wonder if they made the right choice. They will wonder if the people they left behind are still thinking about them. And they will have no way of knowing, because the delay is too long. The distance is too vast, and the silence is too deep. This is the opposite direction. This is the Mars we do not talk about. The Mars that is not a frontier, but a prison. The Mars that is not a new beginning, but an ending. The Mars that asks us not what we will gain, but what we will lose. And that question, what will we lose, is the most important question we have never truly answered. But let us step back. Let us take a wider view. Because Mars is not just a destination for individuals. It is a project for civilization. And civilizations, like individuals, have to make choices about what they value. We talk about Mars as a backup plan, as an insurance policy against the disasters that could befall Earth. Asteroid impacts, climate collapse, nuclear war, pandemics. These are real threats. They are not paranoid fantasies. They are legitimate concerns. And the argument for Mars, the practical, sensible, sober argument, is that we should not put all our eggs in one basket. We should spread humanity across the solar system. We should make ourselves resilient. We should ensure that even if Earth becomes uninhabitable, our species survives somewhere else. It is a compelling argument. It is logical. It is prudent. It is also, if we are honest with ourselves, deeply pessimistic, because embedded within the argument for Mars is the assumption that we will fail, that we will not solve our problems here on Earth, that we will not learn to live sustainably, that we will not find a way to heal the damage we have done. Instead, we will abandon ship. We will leave. We will take our most advanced technology, our best minds, our most ambitious dreams, and we will escape to another world. And Earth, the planet that gave us life, that nurtured us, that sheltered us for hundreds of thousands of years, will be left behind, abandoned, forgotten, reduced to a historical footnote. That is the opposite direction, not just the direction away from Earth, but the direction away from responsibility, the direction away from care, the direction away from the profound, beautiful, fragile connection we have with the only home we have ever known. There is a word for this. It is not a scientific word. It is not a technical word. It is a human word. It is grief. We are in the quietest corners of our imagination, grieving the loss of Earth, even before we leave it, because we know, somewhere deep down, that if we go to Mars, we are not just expanding. We are retreating. We are acknowledging that we have failed. And that is a heavy thing to carry. But perhaps this is too dark. Perhaps we have drifted too far into the shadow. Let us bring back some light, because Mars is not just a symbol of loss. It is also a symbol of possibility. And the possibility is real. It is tangible. It is worth pursuing. But it is worth pursuing with open eyes, with honest awareness, with a willingness to confront the difficult questions before we leave, rather than after. Because once we leave, there is no going back. There is no undoing the choice. There is no returning to the world we left behind. So we owe it to ourselves, to our future selves, to the first Martians, to the generations that will follow them, to think carefully, to think deeply, to think honestly. And that is what this journey is about. Not the celebration of Mars, not the condemnation of Mars, but the meditation on Mars, the slow, careful, respectful exploration of what it means to leave everything behind. And that is where we will begin again. Part 2. The Biology of an Alien. Let us turn inward now, to something much closer, something we often take for granted, our own bodies. Because before we can truly understand what it means to live on Mars, we must understand what it means to live as a human being. And that is something we rarely think about. We wake up, we move through our day, we eat, we sleep, we breathe. All of it effortless, all of it automatic, all of it perfectly tuned to the environment in which we evolved. That environment is Earth. And Earth is not just a planet. It is a finely calibrated machine, tuned over billions of years to support life. The gravity, the atmosphere, the magnetic field, the distance from the sun, the tilt of the axis, the length of the day. Every single one of these factors is exactly what it needs to be for us to exist. And Mars has none of them. Well, that is not quite accurate. Mars has some of them, but it has them in the wrong proportions. Let us start with gravity. We mentioned it briefly in the first part, but let us dwell on it now. Let us really feel it. On Earth, gravity pulls us downward with a force of 9.8 meters per second squared. That number is not arbitrary. It is the result of Earth's mass, its density, its rotation, its position in the solar system. And that number has shaped every aspect of our biology. Our bones are dense because they have to support our weight. Our muscles are strong because they have to move us against gravity. Our hearts are powerful because they have to pump blood upward against the pull of the Earth to reach our brains. On Mars, gravity is 3.7 meters per second squared, about 38% of Earth's. That is not a small difference. That is a fundamental change. And your body does not know how to handle it. In the first weeks, you would feel lighter. You would be able to jump higher, move faster, carry heavier objects. You might even enjoy it. But your body would not enjoy it, because your body is constantly adapting. It is constantly measuring the environment and adjusting itself to match. And on Mars, the adjustment is catastrophic. Your bones, no longer needing to support as much weight, begin to lose mass. Not just a little, a lot. Studies on astronauts who spent months in microgravity show bone loss of 1 to 2% per month. On Mars, with some gravity but not enough, the loss would be slower, but it would still happen. Over the course of a year, you might lose 5 to 10% of your bone density. Over 5 years, you might lose half. And bone loss is not reversible. Once those minerals are gone, they are gone. Even if you return to Earth, which you won't, your bones would never fully recover. Your muscles face the same fate. They atrophy. They shrink. They become weaker. Your heart, that faithful organ, begins to pump less blood. Your blood volume decreases because your body no longer needs as much fluid to maintain pressure against gravity. Your immune system weakens. Your metabolism changes. Your vision degrades. Yes, your vision. Astronauts on long-duration missions have reported changes to their eyesight. Pressure changes inside the skull. Fluid shifts, and the altered shape of the eyeball itself. On Mars, these effects would be permanent. So the first Martians would not be the robust, capable explorers of our imagination. They would be fragile, frail, slowly deteriorating day by day, in ways they could not stop and could not reverse. This is not a failure of medicine. This is not a failure of technology. This is biology. This is the simple, unalterable fact that we were not made for Mars. We were made for Earth. And yet, and this is where it becomes truly interesting, there is a possibility. There is a chance that the human body can adapt. Not fully, not perfectly, but enough. Because evolution is slow, but it is not stagnant. And if humans live on Mars for long enough, generations, centuries, millennia, we might change. We might evolve. We might become something new, something that is no longer entirely human. This is a strange thing to contemplate. It is almost uncomfortable, but it is worth considering. Because if we go to Mars, we are not just planting a flag, we are planting a seed that will grow into a different branch of the human family tree, a branch that is adapted to the red planet, a branch that is shorter, perhaps, lighter bones, less muscle mass, larger lungs to process the thin atmosphere, different eyes to handle the dimmer sunlight, different skin to resist the radiation, different blood to transport oxygen more efficiently. Over time, these changes would accumulate, and eventually, the Martians would no longer be us. They would be something else, something that could not return to Earth, something that would look at Earth and see a world that is too heavy, too bright, too crowded, something that would feel for the first time that Mars is home. This is not science fiction. This is evolutionary biology. It is the slow, patient work of natural selection. It is what happens to every species that moves into a new environment. And if we are honest with ourselves, it is one of the most extraordinary aspects of the Martian project, because it means we are not just exploring a planet. We are exploring what it means to be human. We are testing the limits of our own biology. We are asking the question, how much can we change before we are no longer ourselves? And that question has no easy answer. But let us move on. Let us move from the internal to the external, from the body to the environment. Because Mars is not just a place with less gravity. Mars is a place with almost no atmosphere. The pressure on the surface of Mars is about 1% of Earth's. That is not a difference of degree. That is a difference of kind. On Earth, the atmosphere presses down on us with a force of about 14 pounds per square inch. We do not notice it. We are used to it. It is the baseline of our existence. On Mars, the pressure is so low that your blood would boil. Not from heat, from the lack of pressure. At the low pressure of the Martian surface, water vaporizes at human body temperature. Your saliva would bubble. Your tears would evaporate. The moisture in your lungs, your throat, your eyes would begin to boil away. You would not survive without a pressure suit. And that suit would be your constant companion, your constant protection, your constant reminder that you do not belong there. Because every time you step outside, you are putting on a machine that keeps you alive, a machine that gives you oxygen, regulates your temperature, shields you from radiation, and maintains the pressure your body desperately needs. And that machine is not comfortable. It is heavy. It is cumbersome. It limits your movement, your vision, your sense of touch. It isolates you from the world around you. It turns the experience of being outside into a chore, a risk, a constant negotiation with the reality of your own vulnerability. This is not the romance of exploration. This is the reality of survival. And survival on Mars is a full-time job. But what about the inside? What about the habitats? Surely inside you can take off the suit. Surely inside you can be human again. Well, yes, but inside is not Earth. Inside is a box. A box designed to keep you alive in an environment that is trying to kill you. A box that is shielded from radiation by meters of rock or water or regolith. A box that is lit by artificial light because the sun, even when it shines, is weaker on Mars. A box that smells of recycled air, recycled water, recycled everything. A box that is small, smaller than you are used to, smaller than your apartment, smaller than your house, smaller than any space you have ever lived in, because every square meter of habitat has to be built, shipped, and maintained at enormous cost. So you live in a box, and inside that box, you are safe. But inside that box, you are trapped. And the box is your entire world. The box is your kitchen, your bedroom, your living room, your office. The box is where you eat, sleep, work, exercise, and socialize. The box is where you live. And you cannot leave. Not for long. Not without the suit. Not without the machine. So you stay. And you look out the window. And you see the red desert stretching to the horizon. And you wonder if the trade was worth it. We have spent this part of the journey looking inward, looking at the body, looking at the environment, looking at the reality of life on Mars. And it is not a pretty picture, but it is an honest one. And honesty is what we are seeking. Not comfort, not reassurance, not the easy optimism of promotional videos and mission briefings. We are seeking the truth. The truth about what it means to live on a world that was not made for us. The truth about what it means to leave our own. And the truth, as we are discovering, is complicated. It is messy. It is uncomfortable. It is full of trade-offs and sacrifices and difficult questions. But it is also full of wonder. Because even in the difficulty, there is something extraordinary. Something profoundly human. We are the species that looks at a distant, dead world and says, "We will go there." We are the species that looks at a hostile, unforgiving environment and says, "We will survive." We are the species that looks at the limits of our own biology and says, "We will adapt." That is not nothing. That is everything. That is the essence of who we are. And that is what makes Mars worth contemplating. Not because it is easy, but because it is hard. Because it asks everything of us. And because, in the asking, it reveals who we truly are. Part 3. The Silence Between Worlds. Let us now turn our attention to something we have touched on but not fully explored. Something that is, perhaps, the most profound difference between Earth and Mars. Something that has nothing to do with gravity or atmosphere or radiation. Something that is entirely human. Let us talk about the silence. Not the silence of a quiet room, not the silence of a winter night, not the silence of a deep forest. We are talking about a different kind of silence. The silence of absolute distance. The silence that comes when you are so far from home that the very concept of home begins to feel abstract. We have talked about the communication delay, the 4 to 24 minutes between question and answer. But we have not talked about what that delay does to the human mind. And it is significant, Because human beings are not built for delayed communication. We are built for immediacy. We are built for the back and forth of conversation, the rhythm of dialogue, the subtle cues of tone and expression and timing. We are built for presence. On Mars, presence is impossible. You are always separated, always isolated, always on the other end of a long, empty line. And that isolation is not just emotional, it is neurological. It changes the way you think. It changes the way you process information. It changes the way you feel about the people you left behind. Because the people you left behind are not waiting for you. We said that earlier, but let us really feel it now. Imagine you are on Mars. You have just finished a long day of maintenance. You are tired. You are lonely. You want to talk to someone you love. So you send a message. It takes minutes to reach Earth. And then you wait. You wait for the reply. And when it comes, it is not what you expected. It is not the comfort you needed. Because the person on the other end has been living their life. They have been moving forward. They have been changing. And you are frozen. You are stuck in the moment you left. You are a ghost, haunting their present. And they are a ghost, haunting yours. This is not a minor issue. This is not something that can be solved with better technology. This is fundamental. This is the human condition, amplified by distance. And it is one of the most overlooked challenges of Martian colonization. We are so focused on the physical survival, the air, the water, the food, the radiation, that we forget about the psychological survival. We forget that the mind is as fragile as the body. We forget that isolation can be as deadly as asphyxiation. And on Mars, isolation is not optional. It is not a phase. It is not something you can escape. It is the permanent condition of your existence. But let us not stop there. Let us go deeper. Let us talk about the small things, the things we do not think about, the things that make life worth living. The taste of fresh bread, still warm from the oven. The smell of rain on dry pavement. The sound of laughter, not through a speaker, but in the same room. The touch of another person, not gloved, not suited, but skin to skin. These are the things that ground us. These are the things that remind us we are alive. And on Mars, none of them exist. The food is processed. The air is recycled. The sound is filtered. The touch is mediated. Everything is a step removed from reality. Everything is a simulation of the life you left behind. And over time, that takes a toll. It erodes something essential. It dulls the senses. It flattens the emotions. It makes you feel like you are not quite real, like you are living in a dream that never ends, a dream that becomes your only reality. This is the opposite direction. This is the Mars that is not about adventure. It is about endurance. It is about holding on. It is about finding meaning in a world that has been stripped of almost everything that made life meaningful. And yet, and this is where it becomes truly complex, there is another side to this. There is the possibility that isolation is not just a burden. It is also a gift. Because isolation forces you to confront yourself. It strips away the distractions. It removes the noise. It leaves you alone with your thoughts. And that can be terrifying. But it can also be transformative. There is a reason that every major spiritual tradition includes periods of solitude. There is a reason that hermits and monks and mystics have sought out isolation for thousands of years. Because in the silence, you hear things you cannot hear anywhere else. You hear your own voice. You hear your own doubts. You hear your own dreams. And you begin to understand who you really are. On Mars, you would have that opportunity. You would have years, decades of solitude. Not complete solitude, of course. You would have your fellow colonists, but even they would not be enough to fill the void left by Earth. You would be alone in a way that no human has ever been alone. And that loneliness would change you. It would strip away everything that was not essential. It would force you to confront the big questions, the questions we spend our lives avoiding. What am I doing here? What is the point of all this? What do I truly value? Who do I want to be? On Earth, we can avoid these questions. We can fill our lives with busyness, with work, with entertainment, with relationships, with the endless noise of modern existence. On Mars, there is no noise. There is only the wind and the dust, and the silence. And in that silence, you would have to answer, for better or worse. Let us shift our focus now, from the individual to the collective. Because the isolation of Mars is not just personal. It is cultural. It is historical. It is existential. When we go to Mars, we are not just sending individuals. We are sending a fragment of our civilization. A small, isolated group of people, cut off from the rest of humanity, left to build a new society on a distant world. And that society will evolve. It will change. It will develop its own norms, its own values, its own language. It will become something distinct, something separate, something that is no longer entirely Earth. This has happened before. It happens every time a group of people is isolated from the larger population. Islands develop unique cultures. Remote valleys develop unique dialects. Separated communities develop unique traditions. And over time, the separation becomes permanent. The differences become too great to bridge. Mars would be the ultimate expression of this phenomenon, a new branch of humanity, a new culture, a new civilization, born from isolation, shaped by distance, defined by the environment. And that new civilization would not be ours. It would not share our values. It would not share our history. It would not share our hopes. It would be something else, something new. And we would watch it from afar, with curiosity, with pride, with a sense of loss, knowing that we had created it, but knowing also that we had lost it. Because once the Martians became truly independent, they would no longer need us. They would no longer look to Earth for guidance. They would no longer see themselves as our descendants. They would see themselves as Martians. And Earth would become a distant memory, a myth, a story told to children, a place that existed once, long ago, before the Martians forged their own destiny. This is not a prediction. It is not a prophecy. It is simply a possibility that emerges naturally from the facts, and it is worth contemplating, because it forces us to ask ourselves what we are really doing. Are we expanding the reach of humanity, or are we dividing it? Are we creating a backup, or are we creating a rival? Are we ensuring our survival, or are we ensuring our separation? The answers are not obvious. They depend on choices we have not yet made. And they depend on how we understand ourselves. What does it mean to be human? Is it a biological category? A cultural category? A historical category? Is it tied to Earth? Is it tied to our shared past? Or can it be reinvented? Can it be redefined? Can it be transplanted to another world? These are the questions that Mars asks us, not through words, through silence, through distance, through the slow, inevitable drift of time. Let us take a moment. Let us pause. Let us breathe. We have been on a long journey. A journey through distance and biology and isolation and culture. A journey through the difficult questions. The questions we avoid. The questions we push aside. And we have not found easy answers. Because there are no easy answers. There is only the exploration, the process, the ongoing, unfolding experience of trying to understand. And that is what this is. An attempt to understand. Not to solve, not to decide. To understand. To feel. To experience. To let the ideas wash over us like a slow tide. Because that is what calm cosmic drift is about. Not the destination, the journey, not the answer, the question, not the certainty, the wonder. And Mars, the real Mars, the honest Mars, the Mars that challenges us and questions us and forces us to grow, is the perfect subject for that journey. It is the mirror we hold up to ourselves. The mirror that reflects our fears and our hopes. The mirror that shows us who we are and who we might become. So let us continue. Let us keep drifting. Let us see where the next part of the journey takes us. Part 4. The Earth we leave behind. We have come a long way. We have traveled across space. We have traveled across time. We have traveled across the landscape of our own minds. And now, at the end of this journey, we return to where we began. We return to Earth. Not physically. We cannot return physically. That is the point. But we return in our thoughts, in our reflections, in our quiet, honest acknowledgement of what we would leave behind. Because that is the opposite direction. Not just the direction away from Earth, but the direction toward understanding, toward appreciation, toward gratitude. Because to truly understand what Mars means, we must understand what Earth means. And we rarely do. We take it for granted. We walk through our days with our eyes half closed, missing the miracle of our own existence. We forget that we are standing on a planet that is perfectly suited for life. We forget that we are breathing air that has been recycled for billions of years. We forget that we are drinking water that has flowed through rivers and oceans and clouds since before our species existed. We forget that we are surrounded by life, by trees and birds and insects and animals, by millions of species, each one a masterpiece of evolution, each one a story, each one a part of the web that sustains us. We forget the beauty, the sunsets, the mountains, the oceans, the forests, the deserts, the tundra, the endless variety of landscapes and climates and ecosystems. We forget the richness, the art, the music, the literature, the architecture, the food, the laughter, the love, the connection. We forget that we are not alone, that we are part of something larger, something older, something more beautiful than we can imagine. And we are planning to leave it, all of it, for a world that has none of these things, a world that is cold and dry and dead, a world that will never have a sunset like ours, a world that will never have an ocean like ours, a world that will never have a forest like ours, a world that will never have a bird singing at dawn, a world that will never have a child laughing in the sunlight. This is not a criticism. This is not an argument. This is an observation. A simple, honest observation about what we are contemplating. And it is worth contemplating. Because if we go to Mars, we are not just leaving a planet. We are leaving a world. A world that is alive. A world that is vibrant. A world that is, in every sense of the word, our home. And we may never see it again. But let us not end on a note of loss. Let us end on a note of appreciation. Because that is what this journey has been about. Not the celebration of Mars, not the condemnation of Mars, but the appreciation of Earth, the recognition of what we have, the gratitude for what we are. Because we are, all of us, incredibly lucky. We are alive at a time when we can look up at the stars and dream. We are alive at a time when we can imagine leaving our home. We are alive at a time when we can ask the big questions and actually pursue the answers. And that is a gift. A gift that we have inherited from generations of explorers and thinkers and dreamers. A gift that we will pass on to generations yet to come, whether they live on Earth or Mars or somewhere else entirely. And that is what matters. Not the destination, not the technology, not the politics or the economics or the logistics. What matters is the wonder, the curiosity, the drive to understand, the willingness to ask difficult questions, the courage to face the answers. That is the human spirit. That is what makes us who we are. And that is what will guide us, whether we stay or whether we go. So here we are, at the end of our journey, but not the end of the story, because the story continues. It continues every time we look up at the night sky, every time we wonder what is out there, every time we imagine what it would be like to stand on another world. It continues in the scientists and engineers who are building the rockets. It continues in the dreamers who are writing the stories. It continues in all of us who are trying to understand. And it will continue, for as long as we remain curious, for as long as we remain open, for as long as we remain human. So let us drift. Not toward Mars, necessarily, not toward any particular destination, but toward the larger perspective. The perspective that reminds us we are small, but also that we are significant. The perspective that reminds us we are fragile, but also that we are resilient. The perspective that reminds us we are alone, but also that we are connected to each other, to Earth, to the cosmos, to the vast, mysterious, beautiful universe that is our true home. Thank you for drifting with us. Thank you for thinking with us. Thank you for wondering with us. And until we meet again, wherever that may be, remember to look up. Remember to breathe. Remember to appreciate the miracle of your own existence, because you are part of something extraordinary, and that something is worth exploring, worth protecting, worth loving. Good night, traveler. Drift well.